Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is a blueprint for building a wealth management enterprise to $3 billion and beyond. It's a conversation with Reza Zamani, founding partner and chief executive officer of SteelPeak Wealth. I'm Mindy Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for financial advisors. This podcast is designed for advisors like you who are interested in learning more about the evolving wealth management industry through candid dialogue with breakaway advisors, those from the C-suite, and industry thought leaders. It's available on our website, diamond-consultants.com, as well as Apple Podcasts and other major podcast platforms. So be sure to subscribe and share it with your colleagues. At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade. And each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. Curious about where, why, and how advisors like you are moving? Download the latest Advisor Transition Report to learn more, including intel on recruiting deals and our insight and analysis on the latest trends in the wealth management space. You'll find it at diamond-consultants.com/transition report. Or if you'd like to talk, feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. When you work for a wirehouse or other large firm, their agenda drives everything you do. Policies and decisions are designed and adopted to ensure that they meet certain standards for the majority. And that's good for many advisors. But for those who have their sights set on the future and having greater freedom in serving clients and growing the enterprise, it may not be the right fit. Reza Zamani knows this firsthand. From 2000 to 2012, he was a wirehouse advisor, first with UBS and later with Morgan Stanley. Yet 2012 would mark the year he decided to leave the wirehouse world to build his own firm, one that allowed them to provide clients with a better model of service and advice than what they could deliver from the wirehouses. Because all of the limitations left him defending the firm, which limited their potential and the ability to achieve their mission, and ultimately slowed their growth. As Reza put it, he wanted clients to be able to have it all without sacrificing solutions or service and free of any conflicts of interest. And these are common refrains shared by many advisors who change firms or models. For Reza, the decision to break away was a good one. They started SteelPeak Wealth in 2012 with $250 million under management. Today, they're managing $3 billion and have 20 advisors on their team. In this episode, Reza joins my partner Louis Diamond to discuss the drivers that led to his leap, why independence was the right path for them, the value he sees in taking on a minority partner, what it really takes to run $1 billion plus business, and much more. There's lots to discuss, so let's get to it.
Reza, thanks so much for joining us. To start, can you share your background and how you landed in the wealth management space to begin with?
Thank you, Louis. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be part of this cast with you and happy to answer that question, of course. Background is I've been in the industry for 25 years, started at a young age in 1999, right out of college. I've spent the first 13 years of my career on the wirehouse, call it Wall Street side, working for UBS and then Smith Barney. They got acquired by Morgan Stanley. And in 2012, made the all-important decision with my two partners to go independent and launch the firm that we call SteelPeak Wealth.
When you joined Smith Barney, I think it was back in 2008, I know it was a long time ago. Do you recall what motivated you to leave UBS to move to Smith Barney back then?
I wish I could tell you it was a long list of reasons, but as you can imagine in the industry, probably even more so now than ever before, it was a lateral move. The motivation was not centered around anything better for clients. The motivation was not centered around any new level of services that we could provide. It was strictly driven by the fact that one firm was offering a forgivable note type of a compensation structure for one to make a move. And there was a sell around, well, you could do these things a little bit better. But again, the reality was that it was strictly a lateral move, moving from UBS to Smith Barney. And even with the acquisition of Morgan Stanley coming in, that was still, again, another lateral move. So again, I wish I could tell you an exciting story about all these new things we were able to provide our clients, but that really wasn't the case.
First up, I appreciate your candor on the topic. Most would not answer so truthfully, but I think a lot of people would feel similar, and there's nothing wrong with that. In hindsight, any regrets about, in your words, making more of a lateral move?
No regrets. I think everything happens for a reason. I think timing of where we were in the industry in terms of what was happening, the dynamics of the financial crisis, and you think about from '07 to '08 and then '08, '09, the failure of Lehman Brothers, the reality that the name on the business card by a big bank or big institution like a UBS or Lehman or Bernstein or any of these names stopped mattering. And therefore, at that time, it was still early for private groups like us, teams like us, to move to the independent side. We were looking at it, we were considering it. But again, no regrets. I think at that time, the mindset made sense to keep it lateral. Again, I tell you, we probably didn't know any better. But it did take the financial crisis for us to realize and understand that there is another side of this industry, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, which relates to fiduciary responsibility and really thinking outside the box and not being under the control of a big brother type of a system to push products.
Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, back in 2008, 2009, when you made your move from UBS to Smith Barney, there wasn't a whole lot of other options that were available. There were a small, tiny, very entrepreneurial group that went independent. But for the most part, a team like yours, you probably had 3 or 4 options, and all of them today, you would have called them lateral. To me, it took the financial crisis for the mindset of advisors to shift in a way where they valued control more, they valued autonomy, they valued business ownership, and came to the realization, like you said, that you don't necessarily need to have the biggest brand on your business card to be successful. And many like you have actually proved the opposite, that when you can create your own brand and build things with it, that in and of itself is a pretty compelling growth strategy.
You nailed it on the head. You are speaking exactly how I present this, in the fact that from a timeline standpoint, in '08, in that period of time, the only option was a lateral move. There was not as much experience or education amongst advisors in terms of what the independent world looked like. And quite frankly, I think there was still this notion that it was a downgrade. That was the mentality. It was a false mentality. But as you accurately stated, it took a major financial crisis for advisors like myself and my team and many advisors to realize that what we were doing at the institutions and firms we're with was not providing fiduciary responsibility to our clients. And that's where then it started to open up our eyes and started to really look at what does this other part of the industry ultimately look like? And that's ultimately what led to the launch of SteelPeak in 2012.
Yeah. So prior to launching SteelPeak in 2012, what did the business look like as far as AUM and your team structure? I know it was a long time ago, but what was your motivation for going independent and even going through the extensive project of thinking about whether it's the right fit for you?
Yeah, great question. I'll answer it in a couple components in that. In terms of the AUM, again, in my 25 years, our business growth, whether it was a practice on the wirehouse side or now a business, predominantly driven by organic referrals, centers of influence, networking, client referrals, collaboration. Of course, now I'm sure we'll talk about there's a lot of growth around the custodian side. But going back then, the AUM in the 2011 heading to 2012 period before we launched SteelPeak was hovering around 250 million in assets for our group. You figure we were above that in '07, and then like every advisor, right, we all had a drop in valuation due to the market's 40-50% drop. And then for us, we went out there, we continued to do our presentations and meet people and certainly not put our head in the sand, and brought in more clients and continued to build the practice. The challenge though, and this is the other part of your question, what was the motivation, right? The motivation was the fact that we felt that we were spending more time having to defend the company that we were with. We had to spend more time talking about why client did not have to worry about ABC firm being the next Lehman Brothers. We had to continue to talk about why they don't have to worry about us having to push products on them or the lack of transparency in fee structure. So as those conversations were coming up, which again, those conversations were not on the table prior to '08, these were starting to slow down our process, slow down our growth, slow down our mission in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And ultimately, that was the motivation for us to say, let's look at the rest of the industry. What does the independent side look like? And ultimately, what we realized was that this is complete transparency, real fiduciary responsibility, not just stating it verbally, but actually being able to put it in writing, having the ability to manage clients' assets for them to understand that there is no conflict of interest whatsoever, fully disclosed. So I would say those were the key motivations that were the initial triggers to move us to the next step of saying it's time for us to become independent.
Very well laid out. We call it the pushes and the pulls. The pushes were the things that were frustrating you or slowing down your process, as you said. And then the pull was the realization that there was a better way of serving clients. So I know this too was some time ago, but can you talk a little bit about how you went about building SteelPeak? How did you pull it all together? To my knowledge, you guys did it all on your own. You didn't work through a platform provider, or today it wasn't even really a thing. We call it supported independence. So how did you go about the crazy hard work of building your own RA from scratch?
Yeah, we did it on our own, and it's a lot of work, and the work continues. It never stops. I'd say, again, go back to 2011 is really when the process started. So although the firm was launched in October of 2012, we took about a year behind the scenes and working late nights and weekends and getting together and really mapping out what we wanted the firm to look like day 1, year 5, year 10, and beyond. Again, as I always say, doing it in quote unquote pencil, knowing the fact that there's going to be a lot of erasing and redoing and adjusting and crossing it out. And that's what proper business plans look like. It's not exactly set in stone. In fact, I can't find or think about any successful company out there in any industry that creates a plan and it's set in stone. So we put all the pieces together. It's spending time looking at, again, what do we want the operations look like? What do we want the investment committee to look like? Do we want to expand beyond Southern California? How do we want to grow the company? Do we want to entertain the idea of M&A? Again, what other types of services do we want to provide in the future, whether it's going to get into tax and insurance and other types of banking, lending type of solutions. So all of these things were put on the table, and ultimately we knew that we had to build a foundation first. I think I'm smart enough to know that I need to surround myself with smarter people. So ultimately for us, the success of SteelPeak is centered around the fact that we have some really great, smart people at the executive level, at the management level, and even at the entry level that we bring on. And we take a lot of pride in the fact that we want to bring really smart, motivated people at the firm. And that goes back to culture. So when we were looking at launching SteelPeak, we asked ourselves, do we want this firm to be represented by the founders? Meaning, should we call it Zamani, Esmail Begi Zamani? Should we call it by our last names, our first names? Should we collaborate? Should we take our initials? And the quick answer was absolutely not. This firm is not a representation of the founders, although the founders are certainly building it in terms of the work that we're doing behind the scenes. But it is a representation of the people that we have here and the people that we're going to continue to bring here. So the work never ends, Louis, as you can imagine. We have goals that we've achieved, and we lie to ourselves with our goals, meaning that these goals are not set in stone. We keep pushing the needle further out to make sure that it's there, but it's essentially in a horizon that you can never really touch.
It's very interesting the way you mapped it out. I want to ask you about that initial vision because, I mean, look, it's hard, especially when you're going into kind of like, it's really the great unknown, right? You grew up in the business, working a certain way, doing what you were able to do, not really able to put your imaginative hat on and say, this is what ultimately I want to do, because you just don't know what's possible. So how much of that initial business plan that you wrote in pencil became true this day? And how did that impact the decisions you made early on in the business? It's a great learning for anyone who's thinking about following your footsteps and launching their own independent business or relaunching their practice on a different platform.
Yeah, and here's what we did. When we launched the firm, there were 6 of us. So fast forward to today, there's now 55 plus of us at SteelPeak. So when there's 6 of us, you got to imagine we still ran the firm and operated the firm as if it was 50 of us. Meaning we created a business development committee. We created a compliance committee. We created an investment committee. We created an operations committee. Now, we may laugh, right? Because there's only 6 of us. So all 6 are in every single committee. Everyone's wearing all these different hats, but you have to think big. You have to think that way. So you can't think like you're a 6-person firm, and we never did. We looked at it as we're a major firm. We have to have departments, and we literally switched hats in every meeting that we had to discuss what we wanted the firm to look like. So from a business development standpoint, what we outlined was where we were at the time of launch of the firm, which is roughly 250 million in assets. How are we going to get to the first hurdle of 500 million? How are we going to get to a billion? And then how are we going to get to the next level to ultimately, as you very well know where we are now, is sitting just about 3 billion in assets. So how we outlined it was, well, here's what we know. What has worked for us in the past has been client retention, increase wallet share, cultivate relationships with existing clients to get referrals, continue to work with centers of influence, present, get out there presentations, get groups of people, networking, all these things, right? But that was what we knew. But what we also understood was the growth engine of what we wanted to achieve could not just be limited to that. We had to look at opening up more doors. We had to get into areas that we were not accustomed to before. And we knew at some point getting into the world of acquisition, M&A, onboarding, roll-ups, different terminologies we use had to be on the table. So that was mapped out. But we also understood that we weren't ready for it year 1. We also were not ready for it necessarily probably year 4 or 5, but it was part of the long-term game plan to get to that level. To get there though, again, build each of the committees. Have a true investment committee built out, compliance committee. Come out with our story, make sure that's put in place. Operations at the key level, bring in the best type of technology. The second element of our growth was a big component of growth for some RI firms, if they can really wrap their head around it, is the custodian referral platforms that certainly Charles Schwab had. And I'll give you the very short version of the story. When we launched the firm in October of 2012, I spoke to the leaders of Schwab and said, we're here, we're excited, and we love to be on the Schwab custodian platform. As you can imagine, their response was, yeah, you and everybody, wait in line. It's closed and call us later. But Luce, you've known me now for a while. You know me that I've been in the business for 25 years. I started in 1999 in an era where we made 500 phone calls a day. We reached out. We didn't just knock on doors. Sometimes we had to kick down doors. So I realized this in this relationship with Schwab, it was going to take some time. I literally called them and emailed them 4 or 5 times a month, whether it was meeting for a cup of coffee or lunch, and just constantly in their ear because I knew that we had something. We had something that was different. I studied the industry. And in the RIA world, it's a fraternity sorority, which is fantastic, and we collaborate. So other RIA firms that were in the Schwab Advisor Network platform, what I was able to get feedback was financial planning, estate planning, investment advisory, asset allocation. Of course, we did that. But the key differentiator for our firm was that we had started to build out model portfolios where we were building scale into covered call option strategies, what we call enhanced cash secured put strategies, unique mechanisms of investing where we can take concentrated positions. And then we were starting to build out the alternative investment platform where it's not just using third-party alternative investments, but our own in-house alternatives that we're building in VC, private equity, getting into the world of sports and so forth. So again, we had a differentiator, right? That was the story. So it did take about, 6-7 years for the folks over at Schwab to finally listen and give us an opportunity. But that's ultimately what led to us getting put on the Schwab Advisor Network platform. And I'm moving on from your question here, but I might as well just mention it. Map of what we created. It went from managing 250 million assets to 500 million in assets in about approximately 2018. Once we were able to get on the Schwab Advisor Network platform with limited Schwab branches that we were allowed to work with, that's where then the organic growth exploded from 500 million to 2.6, 2.7 billion through the end of 2023. And here we are now crossing about 3 billion in assets, which I would tell you is about 97% organic. And now we're starting to enter the world of acquisitions and roll-ups.
Wow. First, congratulations on the success, but also I love the tenacity of knowing that you had something special, but going through all the work it took to make it happen. So a lot to like about what you said. On the topic of growth, so we'll talk a little bit about M&A and advisor recruiting. I know, like you said, the Schwab referral network is a big part of the organic growth. What are the other levers that you focus on to have taken the firm from 250 million to 3 billion and rapidly growing over the last few years?
I think the proper use of technology to make the firm more efficient, to give our advisors the ability to spend less time on tedious tasks, but rather spend more time in developing relationships with clients, reaching out, cultivating those relationships, and getting out there and again, looking for more market share, right? Increasing wallet share, as we'll call it. I think we've done a great job in that and in looking at the best of the best technology, constantly looking at new ways to bring things in to plug any holes that we may have at the end of the day. So I think that's one component of it, Lewis, in terms of truly embracing technology and also knowing the fact that what we're doing today is probably going to change again in about 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. There's a whole another topic we could even talk about another session in terms of AI, and we're certainly embracing that. But I would tell you again, in terms of growth, we're a big believer, and this is something we put in place 12 years ago. And some of it we launched several years ago, some of it we've launched a year ago, and some of it we're launching any day now, quite frankly. And it's the evolving of the wealth management industry, specifically RIA, to not just be asset managers, not just be financial planners, but getting into fully making sure clients understand that in-house, not refer in-house, we can provide solutions for insurance. In-house, we can prepare living trusts, amend, update wills and trusts. In-house, doing tax preparation and tax consulting. Again, in-house, looking at other types of private solutions that are built at a proprietary level. So all these things that I just outlined to you were part of our growth strategy, right? And that's things we've implemented. So we have SteelPeak Insurance, where our advisors can collaborate and have conversations with clients around insurance, again, if it's needed. We launched SteelPeak Estate Consulting, where we now have the ability in-house for our clients in a very competitive cost structure to create living trusts for them. Again, we're not referring it out to an outside attorney and we're saying, here you go, work with so-and-so. It's all built in-house for the client. I'm very proud of the fact that in 5 days, so timing of this conversation you're not having is important. In 5 days, we are launching SteelPeak Tax Consulting. This has been a work in progress for several years where we want to bring in high-end experienced CPAs, where again, now we can go to our clients and say, this is something we can do for you in-house. So our vision is, as time goes by, especially next generation type of clients, they want simplicity, they want ease, and they want to work with a group under a family office type of a structure where, again, your investment advisor is not going to be able to do all the work, but the key person you're working with at the investment firm can quarterback the relationship and bring in all the other experts, but they're also at the same firm. And this gives a client the peace of mind to know that the tax department and the investment department, there is internal collaboration to bring the best level of service to the client. So above and beyond attracting assets and attracting clients through the Schwab referral platform, in terms of our investment story, it's now widening it in terms of a truly comprehensive, holistic way of bringing wealth management to the table.
And this may be a bit of a dumb or obvious question, but I have to ask it anyway. Why is it that having these services in-house is a driver of growth? Because I'm thinking about a number of really high quality RAs I know, certainly advisors that practice at the Morgans, Merrills, UBSs of the world, where they're able to still provide access to many of the same services that you mentioned to clients, but instead they're going through third-party experts that are in their network. So why is your way, maybe not better, but for you, how come it has driven so much growth?
I think it's more efficient, and I'll tell you exactly why it's going to be driving more growth. But the way you just explained it, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, that was us. I mean, that was me back at UBS and Morgan Stanley, and quite frankly, even 9-10 years ago when we launched this firm, because we didn't have any other option. When we have a strong relationship with the client, which our advisors do, and we have a conversation with the client, and we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what does their overall entire comprehensive financial picture look like. If they have an existing tax advisor, great. If they don't, normally they're asking advisors like us and other advisors, right? Like, who should I work with? And there's this concept of, let me refer you to so, and then, behind the scenes, Louis, you and I both know maybe there was an expectation, maybe that person can refer back. And look, that's not the case anymore. For us, it's a matter of providing an efficient way for clients to have these services all built in-house. And why is there growth center around that? Is because the mindset of the client is moving more and more towards simplicity. There's a lot of noise out there. Okay, we have distracted. The phone is no longer just a phone, right? In fact, the iPhones that we have and these other phones that we have, 2% is actually used as a phone and 98% is used for many other things, which it's fantastic, but also means there's a lot of noise. We're constantly being presented different things to be able to look at and do, whether it's a robo platform or looking at this app and news coming from here and there. And when you think about next generation planning, the massive amount of wealth that will transfer over the next 10 to 20 years to this next generation, what we have learned and what we have realized, and we stand 100% behind this, is that this generation is looking for simplicity. They're looking for in-house, and they don't want to work with 6 different people at 6 different institutions. They want it built in-house where it's all being done by one person quarterbacking it, simplify it. And my other comment is when you think about tax planning, when one refers a client to a tax advisor outside of their firm, I would tell you that is a referral. There is limited involvement by the advisor in terms of collaboration. Maybe they got on a Zoom call here and there and a phone call randomly. But when you think about true in-house, now what's being presented to the client is when your investments are being actively managed with tax sensitivity or we'll call it even tax awareness, above and beyond the investment team doing this, your tax team also has visibility of what's going on. So they're not just asking the advisor at the end of the year, hey, can you send me some tax reports? Or, hey, are the 1099s ready? That's transaction oriented, right? That's like going to a butcher and saying, yeah, cut me up some meat and package it up and I'll take it home. The new way is, let me work with a nutritionist. So let me look at how do we collaborate together to make sure that you are healthy? And then now how do we collaborate together to make sure that your wealth is healthy? Well, that can only happen if there's internal collaboration amongst the different specialists at the same firm.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like with everything, there's plenty of people that would say, I'd rather refer out to the best of the best in each category, and no one firm can have a monopoly on the best people. But I tend to agree more with your side because I see it in many folks we've had on this podcast and just what I've seen as the most successful RIAs. It's how do I make everything in-house and make everything simpler for the client? Because ultimately, it also helps you stand out versus 99% of firms that aren't doing that. So it's amazing that it's been such a successful part of your business. I can hear the enthusiasm in your voice about what you think it will do for the business. And it's my next question. It's probably a perfect bridge. So I know SteelPeak is very involved with recruiting financial advisors, acquiring businesses. So what does the short pitch sound like for folks that you're courting into SteelPeak? Not talking about clients, but more so advisors. What's the value proposition to them?
Great. Thank you for that question. Before I tell you the value proposition, let me tell you what we built here for it. Because again, as you heard me say early on, I'm smart enough to know that I'm not the smartest person. And I'm smart enough to know that I got to surround myself with much smarter people. At this firm, the leaders of this firm should never be the smartest. We should constantly bring some great, smart, experienced people to the table. When we saw that our organic growth was exceeding the industry standard, we continue to put the foot on the gas pedal. But we also realized that in order to take the firm from now where we are at 3 billion to 20 billion and beyond, organic growth, especially with the Schwab Advisor Network platform, the custodian platform, internal referrals, cannot be the only driver of that growth. We need to look at the world of M&A, acquisitions, mergers. We have to look at roll-ups, advisor breakaways, and educate the Morgan and UBS and Wells advisors out there to understand what the independent world ultimately looks like. So the first thing we did is last year around this time is we launched a new committee. I'm big on committees here. We launched a new committee called the Corporate Development Committee. And the Corporate Development Committee, I reached out to a former branch manager of mine, Chris Shelburne, who was my boss 25 years ago when I was a rookie in this industry. And I love to joke with him, but now it's really not a joke. I'm his boss. And he's a 38-year veteran of the industry, spent decades at UBS and Merrill and Wells and Oppenheimer, and truly understands the landscape. So we brought him in. We made him our director of corporate development. He's now built a team around himself. His mission on the inorganic part of our growth is to reach out, build relationships with advisors that are at other firms. We'll call it the Wells, Morgan, Merrills, UBSs of the world. Educate them on what this side of the industry looks like on the independent side, and navigate that relationship to see if, again, it has to be a mutual fit. And of course, we're also working with different recruiters and bankers and so forth in what we would believe would be our sweet spot in terms of other RIA firms that make sense to consider joining a firm like us. Now, what is our value proposition? Why would an individual advisor from ABC firm, Wirehouse, want to leave? Or why would an existing RIA firm want to join? The culture of our firm is very important to us and those who join us. And there's many different words I can describe our culture, but for the purpose of this meeting today, I'm going to limit it to one word, and that is growth. If the advisor is seeking a robust, proven process that's been put in place, where we have one of the strongest, if not the strongest, business development committee at our firm, run by my Chief Growth Officer, Tyler Resch, all the way trickling down to our wholesalers, BD managers, to our entire committee that we put in place. We have a process put in place where we want our advisors to be advisors. And therefore, with the 50 plus Schwab branches that we built a relationship with, for us at the end of the day, we have a system put in place where we have a very large number of lead flow coming into our firm. So because of that, it's a compelling story for the advisor that is not looking to, again, like what a lot of us did back in the day, make a lateral move, right? This is not a lateral move. This is a move in terms of economic benefits. Certainly we know based upon valuations day one, but above and beyond that transaction, the growth that we've already have been experiencing and we want this advisor or this firm to be a part of under our firm.
Very helpful. That is compelling. Most advisors are looking for ways to grow. Certainly, you wouldn't be a fit for someone who really wanted to walk in your footsteps and build their own firm from scratch. But I think you and I both know that a lot of folks are looking to operate with more autonomy, more freedom, to have a better value proposition for clients and to tap into the success or the flywheel that someone else has built. So I love it. And I agree that's differentiated. Two more questions for you, Reza. First of which is, I know recently your firm decided to take the big step of selling a minority piece of your business to Emigrant Partners. We've had Carl Heckenberg, who used to run the business on this podcast before, but for those who aren't aware, is a minority investor, a value-added investor in a number of very successful RIAs and wealth management firms around the country. So can you talk briefly about why you decided to approach a transaction when you did, and what has that relationship enabled you to do?
Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, we sat down as an executive committee and we looked at where we are as a firm today, all the new services that we're rolling out, where we want to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and where we want to get to in terms of the next milestone. And as I mentioned earlier, we realized that the organic growth is a major component of it, and we're not going to take our foot off the gas pedal. But we also understood the fact that we do need to get into the inorganic growth in terms of M&A and roll-ups and recruiting. And part of that, to be competitive, certainly having access to capital is a big, certainly needed to be put on the table. We went through the exercise of contacting and working with or conversations with about 10 to 12 different firms that were out there. We chose Emigrant Partners. We believe their executive team, what they had back then, and certainly what they have even now with Jenny running the firm there, which has absolutely been phenomenal. She's been doing a phenomenal job. We've been very excited to work with them. This is a great firm that lets us be who we want to be. So they've allowed us to continue to have the entrepreneur spirit to get out there and bring on these new service lines, grow and cultivate and spend money where we need to spend. But at the same time, they're a capital partner. And for us to be competitive in a world, especially because you got to remember, we're a younger firm in terms of our age, right? I mean, I've been in the business for 25 years, but I'm 47 years old and like to think I'll probably work for another 40 years, 40 plus years. So as you and I both know, the industry is continuing to age and there's a lot of RIA firms out there that are looking for succession planning. And if they're going to sell the business, ideally, they would want to sell to a business that is like-minded, growth-oriented, has an open architecture platform, provides all these services. But I would imagine they also want to sell to a firm that is going to be around and not also looking to liquidate or sell in the next several years, right? So we knew that we had a compelling story, that we were a compelling image to the industry. And therefore, we went through the exercise of identifying the right partner that would not stand in front of us or behind us, but side by side, to be there to guide us in terms of where we need to look at in terms of opportunities. And again, let's call it what it is, be the strong capital partner that we need to get access to the capital to make these all very important transactions.
It seems like you said you had a vision from the beginning of doing M&A and recruiting advisors, but you weren't quite ready for it. And I'm with you that in this environment, you need a significant backer or access to capital to be competitive in the marketplace. So if you wanted to pour gasoline on your proverbial fire, it took an infusion of capital to make it happen. That's very interesting. Last question for you. Any advice for those who are thinking about change? Either some of your ex-colleagues from the wirehouses or anyone in general is considering a transaction or thinking about doing something different in their professional lives?
Yeah, I do have advice. And that advice is look at all your options. I mean, you have to ask yourself, where am I at this stage of my career? And where do I want to be? You have to take a really hard look at yourself and ask, am I at the best situation right now for me and my clients? And look at the landscape. Look at where the industry is headed. Look at the entire environment. Study the difference between being a fiduciary advisor and being a broker or a rep under a wirehouse. Just understand the differences, because the consumer knowledge is increasing very, very fast. And that's a good thing for us on the RI side. They're understanding more and more the importance of working with a fiduciary firm. Now, whether that's SteelPeak or all the other amazing RI firms that are out there. So to my friends that are on the wirehouse side, bank side, truly learn about this industry. Now, if you're speaking to a firm like us, Kurt Shelburne will spend a lot of time educating you, and you may walk away saying, this is great, but I want to launch my own firm. Great, fantastic. We've given you some knowledge to go ahead and do that. Or you may decide, you know what, I don't want to deal with the operations and the admin and all the nitty gritty of building it from scratch. I want to just join something that has a rocket engine put in place for me to come in and be part of that growth for the long term. Fantastic. Be open-minded. Don't overthink it. Lay it all out and come up with a plan in terms of what you want this transition to look like. And my last piece of advice, it's more of a comment, I guess, more than anything else. When I go back to saying don't overthink it, when you're leading a major wirehouse firm and you become independent, because as someone who's done it both ways, right? I've done a lateral move from a UBS to Smith Barney, and then I've done the independent route. And I can tell you the conversations that I had with clients in 2008, going from UBS to Smith Barney, it wasn't easy. It's like, well, here's why we're doing it. This firm has this a little bit better, that a little bit better. It was just a lot of noise that we were trying to throw out there. Oh, but we know we still have a relationship. But I would tell you that when we launched SteelPeak and the conversation we had with clients about Mr. and Mrs. Client, we're now independent, meaning that, first of all, you have best of both worlds. Your money's going to be held at a major institution where you have nothing to worry about. They never took any TARP money, no issues there in terms of investment banking issues. And at the same time, you have an independent advisor that has full transparency. We're fiduciaries. We could take legal responsibility. And I can tell you that conversation was tenfold easier. And the client's responses were, why didn't you do this before? And that's where we had to more battle than anything else. So that's my advice to those out there that are looking at change.
Well said. Also, you as the advisor had probably more conviction that the move that you made launching SteelPeak was that much more exciting and better for the client. So that always, you need to have that conviction. And if you don't, then it's going to shine through to clients. So Reza, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today, opening up about your blueprint for how you've grown more than 10 times since you launched the firm back in 2012, which is amazing. I'm just hearing about the way SteelPeak is positioned in the marketplace. So I really appreciate spending time with us today. This is definitely a conversation we'll circle back on in 5 years when you're at 20 billion. I have every confidence that will be the case.
Thank you, Louis. Appreciate the partnership, and thank you for having me here.
Curious about where, why, and how advisors like you are moving? Download the latest Advisor Transition Report to learn more, including intel on recruiting deals and our insight and analysis on the latest trends in the wealth management space. You'll find it at diamond-consultants.com/transition report. Or if you'd like to talk, feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002.